Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your look at the world of business and economics. This week, on track to become the world's biggest economy this decade, President Xi sets another more ambitious target. Can China become a $30 trillion economy by 2035? More than 100 million people lose their jobs in India as Modi's government enforces a lockdown. Millions migrated back to their villages. Will they return? And with supply chains temporarily broken due to the pandemic, is vertical farming the answer to our ever-increasing demand for food? President Xi has ambition to double the size of China's economy by the middle of the next decade. After mismanaging the pandemic, the United States could relinquish its title to being the world's biggest economy by 2028. Attempts by the Trump administration to restrict access to technology may just be a bump on the road to China's relentless rise. But it doesn't come without its challenges in the form of demographics, massive debts, and geopolitical entanglements. So can Xi hit his ambitious target? Well, right now, the world's second largest economy is worth an estimated $14.3 trillion, according to the World Bank. China's economy is expected to grow at its slowest pace since the Mao era. Despite that, China is actually expected to register growth of 2% for 2020. It's the only G20 nation to do so. But to double by 2035, the economy would need to expand about 4.7% a year. Just a little context, in 2019, the economy grew at the slowest pace in almost 3 decades, 6.1%. So some think the target could be easily reached. Well, it was easy to attain double-digit growth as China has, with the trillions spent on building road, rail and housing across the country. Not a problem as the economy doubled in value 4 times between 1980 and 2010. But as it moves its economy towards a more consumer-reliant model, its debt tripled to a staggering $43 trillion. That's almost 3 times the size of its economy. But that consumer orientation is yielding results. Retail sales rose to $6.2 trillion last year, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, which puts it around $200 billion shy of consumer spending in the American market in 2019. So how does it make the next leap? It has ambitions to become a high-income country. That's defined as gross national product per capita income of $12,375 or more. It also has the challenges, though, of geopolitical tensions with the United States, India, and countries around the South China Sea. Joining me now from London, then, is Douglas McWilliams. Douglas is the founder of the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Good to have you with us. So what gives you the confidence that China's economy will overtake the US by 2028?
China's got 4 times the population of the United States. So when the GDP per capita in China reaches a quarter of that in the United States, the total GDP will be bigger. The other thing that gives us confidence is that although we can't be precise about the individual year, we've got a pretty decent track record in forecasting the world economy. I'd say we're better than anyone else at it, which doesn't mean we're all that good, but it means that if we say something, it's certainly incorporating the best knowledge that's available.
What has it got to do, though, to get to the next milestone, which is $30 trillion?
Well, getting to $30 trillion is not that difficult. I mean, we're assuming that Chinese growth will slow down very considerably. We're expecting rapid growth in the bounce back period because growth last year was pretty close to 0, but still just slightly positive. We're expecting a rapid bounce back to something like 9% growth this year. But we're expecting by the 2030s that growth will be well below 4%. And we think that China can do that. It's based on technology. China's got a good record in technology, and it's based on the fact that the world is increasingly investing in technological solutions. So we think that there's reasonable confidence that it can get there.
But at what cost in terms of debt, right? Because debt has soared to, I think, $43 trillion. Will that have to double again in order to reach a $30 trillion economy?
Debt will continue to grow in China, I think. Some of the debt is sort of manageable. Some of the debt will have to be sorted in various different ways. But I think the whole world at the moment is awash with debt. We had debt even before the pandemic hit us.
Right.
And we've got.
But hang on, let me jump in. When you say it's going to have to be sorted in different ways, how? And what will it mean for the world? Because China is not, a small country, as we're obviously talking about it.
China's a managed economy. I mean, the idea that it's complete free markets is, I think, a sort of Western illusion. China is a much more managed economy. Sorted in this case means that some of it will have to be written off, some of it will have to be swapped for equity, some of it will have to be managed down, people will have to take a haircut. There's a whole range of different things that happen when you start dealing with debt problems. The point is that you don't have to collapse an economy to sort some of the debt problems. And of course, China's not the only country to have a debt problem. Most Western economies now, particularly post-pandemic, have got debt problems, and we're going to have to do similar things.
Can China move towards a more consumer-led economy and consumer-led growth when its working population is likely to decline for the rest of the century, isn't it?
The working population is probably at its peak right now, and certainly would be expected to be smaller. For example, by the end of the century, the expectation is that the working population in India will be 1.5 times bigger than that in China. So yes, you are seeing changes of that kind. But the Chinese at the moment save a very high proportion of what they earn. And it is possible, as their incomes go up, for them to become a more consumer-led economy. And indeed, that's what President Xi is talking about when he talks about growth being based on a dual circulation economy, which means that a lot of the growth will be based on domestic demand as well as on export demand, which has been the traditional leading source of growth.
When you talk about exports, we've got to talk about the US. Where do you see the relationship with the US going? Yes, there is a transition going on in the White House, but on the other hand, there seems to be bipartisan support for the idea of containing China, right?
I think you and I must be talking to the same people in the incoming administration, because certainly the messages that I've got are exactly the same as the ones that you've identified. It does look to me as if the incoming Biden administration won't be that different on economic grounds. But I think there will be two changes of tone, and both could be significant. The first is, I don't think that the Biden administration will be needlessly provocative. The Trump administration had a particular style which tended to be quite aggressive in language and that kind of thing, and say things that on the whole in China were treated quite offensively. They felt that they weren't being treated with proper respect. I think the Biden administration, even if it's tough, will use language that's more emollient and is not designed to offend. And I think that could help a working relationship. I think the second thing is that it's clear to me that one of the things that the Biden administration wants to do is to create greater unity amongst the other countries in the world. And I'm not just talking about the West, but I'm talking about Middle East, I'm talking about Asia. And I think that the aim of the Biden administration is to create a more cohesive group of countries that can negotiate with China. And I think probably we're in a situation where there is a good opportunity for a rapprochement between the US and China, which there was not under the Trump administration. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. It could be that we go in for a period where the two administrations test each other. But it could just be that we get lucky and that the two superpowers, and we're going to be living in a two superpower world for many years, the two superpowers realize that working together will be more successful than trying, at least metaphorically, to make war.
It's been great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Last March, a sudden nationwide lockdown in India prompted internal migration on a massive scale. Tens of millions of workers returned to their villages after losing their jobs in cities. It's estimated more than 120 million people lost their jobs. And there were real fears many of the unemployed wouldn't return to work in the cities. Well, the government has announced billions of dollars in aid, but it hasn't reached everyone. Elizabeth Puranam reports from New Delhi.
Jyoti Kumari rides one of the 5 bicycles she was given after her journey home to the state of Bihar made national headlines during India's lockdown. In May, the 17-year-old cycled 1,200 kilometers with her injured father sitting behind her. She'd gone to take care of him after he was injured in a road accident and was unable to carry on working as a tuk-tuk driver. Then the lockdown was imposed, and with no money, they were forced to leave the city of Gurgaon.
The landlord was asking for rent, saying, "You owe a lot of money." So we thought, what can we do? Then I said, let's go home. And Papa said, we won't make it. But I said, we'll do it.
With all public transport suspended, Jyoti bought a bike for $15 with the last of their money, and they joined a group of people travelling in the same direction. Despite sleeping on the road at night for 7 days, her father Mohan says they were the lucky ones.
The people who were in more distress were the elderly, the people with young children, women carrying big sacks, young boys with blisters. And this hurt us more because I thought these people will die before us.
It was a lockdown which laid bare India's inequality. While the government asked people to stay at home, more than 10 million who'd worked in cities and states away from their homes were forced to walk back. Hundreds died on the journey. But warnings that workers might not come back to their old jobs didn't come to fruition. Despite feeling abandoned by the government or their employers when the lockdown was announced, many migrant workers have returned to the cities and to construction sites like this one. And that's because there isn't enough work for them in rural areas. Abhijit Deb Sharma decided to leave his home in West Bengal and travel the 1,400 kilometers back from where he'd come. He managed to find work again as a labourer.
Everyone was sitting idle at home and there were too many mouths to feed. So I thought it's better if I leave because I'll get whatever work is going, food, and save some money too.
But economists warn that with the government loosening labour laws this year, those workers who have returned are often in a worse situation than they were in before.
So I would say as far as systemic change is concerned, we've gone 2 steps back in terms of the role of the government providing protection, even while we've seen a few temporary relief measures being provided.
The government announced billions of dollars in aid to help those without work, but Abhijit and the Paswans say they haven't received any. The attention and money Jyoti received as gifts have also dried up. Now she says she just wants to finish school, but can't afford to.
A landmark free trade agreement between African nations came into effect on January the 1st. Its implementation has been delayed because of the pandemic. 55 nations signed up after it was finalized at the African Union Summit last July. Well, under the deal, tariffs on 90% of goods will be eliminated. The World Bank says it'll increase the continent's income by $450 billion by 2035. The agency also says Africa's exports will get a $560 billion boost. And the free trade agreement promises to lift 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty. Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris has more from Niamey, Niger.
Workers at this garment factory rushed to deliver thousands of face masks. The owner says more than 2.5 million were met here to help Niger control the spread of COVID-19. But as the Africa Free Trade Agreement comes into effect, he foresees trouble ahead for the continent's poorer countries.
Small and poor economies will always be at a disadvantage. Hopefully, as time goes on, we can get special considerations. Otherwise, it will be difficult to compete.
Businesses in poor countries may have their concerns, but overall, experts say the agreement will eventually benefit them. They believe the cheap cost of labor in these countries will attract more industries.
Intra-African trade can spur industrial development. The level and pace of industrialization among African countries vary. Some will have advantage over others, but African countries need to buy and sell raw and finished products among themselves.
Landlocked Niger currently imports most of its needs, from bottled water to food and machinery.
From big retail to local markets, Niger is flooded with imported products. Because of its weak infrastructure and industrial base, the country will continue to depend on imports, making it difficult for local industries to grow.
Experts say it's hard to see European and Asian multinational companies giving up the trade advantage they've held in Africa for a century. Products from Europe, Asia and Africa's larger economies line the shelves at Niamey's biggest retail monopoly. Consumers prefer these brands. Traders say there won't be many local goods on store shelves unless government steps in.
We should be given support. Government should facilitate easy acquisition of land and loans from banks.
But it's hard to see how governments on the continent can do that without breaching the protectionism rules of Africa Trade Agreement and the World Trade Organization.
Now, the pandemic disrupted some of the world's well-oiled global supply chains. The spotlight has been thrown onto food security and the environmental costs of flying in food from thousands of miles away. But land within city limits can be expensive. The solution? Maybe grow vertical. Al Jazeera's Paul Rees reports from Stockholm.
It's harvest time, but not as we know it. These very modern farmhands are bringing in the crops from a vertical farm, plants growing from the walls instead of the ground. No tractors required, just a pair of scissors and artificial intelligence. Sensors that feed information on factors like speed of growth and nutrition content into a central database, so that on this farm, the computer is in charge.
The farm that you're seeing here, everything is basically connected. So all the parameters that we have that have an influence on the growth of a plant, we're controlling them. We're building our basically food brain. We control everything by help of artificial intelligence, and we create the perfect plant.
The mint, basil, kale and rocket here get everything they could ever desire. Light, water, humidity, temperature, tailored to their individual needs. And without the risky business of growing out in nature.
Anyone inside the farm has to wear a protective suit like this to stop bacteria coming in from outside. It also means they don't need pesticides, so you can eat the produce straight off the wall.
They taste better than the average supermarket salad, and they're already being sold in local stores and restaurants in Stockholm. And local means local. The Swegreen farm, hidden under this building in an old newspaper archive, is part of a programme called Neighbour Food. It aims to give all urban Swedes access to produce grown within yards of their door. The global movement in urban farming could play a vital role in preventing food crises, as COVID-19 exposes weaknesses in the supply chain that have left people hungry everywhere from Zimbabwe to the US.
The climate crisis, the epidemic ongoing right now, has shown us how vulnerable we are in the cities. We've become very passive consumers. We want to turn that around, and where people start producing in the spaces that are otherwise empty, those spaces below our buildings can be used for food production.
This farm's so-called food brain is available on subscription, so any startups can have their own environment controlled from here. It could make vertical farming a growth industry that puts more food within easy reach at a time when it's most needed.
Now, I just want to show you this before we start our discussion on whether vertical farming has a future. This is a Silicon Valley startup called Plenty. It's backed by SoftBank, the former chairman of Google, and Amazon's Jeff Bezos. Now, they've collectively plowed $400 million into the ag tech company. Plenty claims its vertical farm can produce the same quantity of fruit and vegetable as a 720-acre flat farm, but on only 2 acres. How? Well, by using artificial intelligence and robots, it's able to use 95% less water and 99% less land. Well, let's bring in our guest from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, Leo Marsalis. Leo is head of the Horticulture and Product Physiology Group. Good to have you with us. So, is it possible to feed the world through vertical farming?
Well, what we have to consider in vertical farming, we can in fact grow every crop. I would say technically we can grow just any crop. Any crop will do very well.
Can we grow enough of it, though?
Yes, we could. Of course, we would need to build them, and then we could grow definitely sufficient. The question is if it is for every crop economic feasible. And I think this is in particular very well economically feasible for fresh vegetables.
What about the produce, though? Does it end up with the same nutrients as those grown in the natural environment, if there is still such a thing as a natural environment in this day and age?
Yeah, so the nutritional value of the crops very much depends on how we grow them. And in these systems, we can grow or we can choose the conditions that we need. So I would say in the end, we can grow with a better nutritional value and a better quality. Of course, we have to make the right choices how we grow them. We can choose to do it better.
All right, so explain the process to us. How can you grow things using less chemicals, not using genetically modified seeds, and yet still keep the yields high?
So we grow inside, everything is controlled. If no pests or diseases get in, you also don't need to destroy it. So that is because there's a closed system. We keep the pests and diseases out. If you keep them out, you don't need pesticides to destroy them. With respect to the water, we grow them for water and nutrients. We grow the plants directly in the water with the nutrients, or we might use a substrate like rock wool. The idea is that all the water that we supply too much is being reused. It's collected and reused, so that makes no loss of water and no loss of nutrients. Then there is still a loss of water by transpiration of the plants, so that ends up as water vapor. But in these closed indoor systems, we can also collect the water vapor. So, and that makes that we hardly use any water. Well, and how do we then get so high yield? And that is because we can control the temperature. We can control the light intensity, so how much light, but also the color of the light. We can control the air humidity. And because we can control all those factors, we can get a higher growth rate. Although I should say we still need electricity because we use lamps, and the lamps need a lot of electricity. So we have to realize that this system needs electricity.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was just about to jump in and say, well, it might be water efficient, but it does use a lot of electricity. Isn't that still a challenge? It's got to become more energy efficient, right?
I would say at this moment, the electricity use is one of the major challenges. And that's also in our research that we have decided, well, this is what we need to improve. That is by using more efficient lighting, but in fact, in particular on how can we further improve the efficiency of the plant growth. So although it is already very efficient, we see there are still a lot of opportunities to make it more efficient. So we have to still have a higher growth rate with less light. If there is less light, we use less electricity. Then it is about further improving the whole climate control system. And that is definitely a challenge, and a challenge we are working on at this moment to drastically improve that aspect as well.
All right, now what I'm wondering is, there was an approach by some resource-poor nations to go and buy land in developing countries. Sovereign wealth funds were doing that. Does vertical farming mean that that approach is now a thing of the past?
Yeah, probably this is more on a political issue on how it is dealt with. I would say with vertical farming, we can get a lot of production on a very small land area. We hardly need any land area. But as I indicated, I think this is in particular suitable for fresh vegetables, and it is not so much or not economic feasible for the grain crop.
All right, it's been good to get your thoughts. Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
And that's our show for this week. There's more for you online, though, at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has entire episodes for you to catch up on. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Sami Zaidan. From the whole team here, thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.